On paper, hustle culture looks empowering. Work hard, build your dream, show your kids what's possible. I believe that too. But what no one talks about is what it does to a parent's nervous system and eventually what it costs your family. I know because I lived it. Hi, friends. I'm Stephanie, and welcome back to the Conscious Crew. Today, I want to talk about what hustle culture actually cost my family and what I had to unlearn. There was a season of my life where I thought doing more meant doing better. About 8 years ago, I was working as a PA and I was working 12-hour shifts, driving 1 hour each way. I was running a family travel blog. I was raising three small children, ages 4, 4, and 9 months. I was training for half marathons. I was lifting intensely, and I was known as the person who could do it all. On paper, I was high functioning, but behind the scenes, I was running on fumes. So, what does hustle culture actually cost you? For me, I essentially never had a menstrual cycle. I also suffered with daily debilitating fatigue to the point where I would be commuting to work at 7 a.m. and have to pull over into a rest area to take a nap in my car and then take another nap on my lunch break. I also had chronic abdominal pain and bloating, dizziness every time I stood up, and unrelenting anxiety that honestly I didn't even know was anxiety at the time. I had recurrent injuries from running and lifting and not resting, and my system was completely depleted and screaming for help. I didn't collapse overnight, but slowly over time, I drained every reserve that I had. And here's the part that no one talks about. It's not just physical, it cost me emotionally too. I was constantly on edge. I couldn't sit still long enough to feel anything. I was in a constant state of fight or flight, and I had anxiety surging through me all the time. And I didn't even know it was anxiety. I thought that's what it just meant to be driven. I couldn't hold space for myself. And when you can't hold space for yourself, you absolutely cannot hold space for others around you, particularly my patients, my peers, my children, or even my husband. And the thing about burnout, it doesn't just stay in your body, it spills over into your home. Going to the playground was exhausting. Bath time felt like a chore. Bedtime drained me. Even simple outings with the family or out in nature felt overwhelming and exhausting. I loved my husband and children deeply, but I was running on empty. And then the mom guilt, that was unbearably heavy to carry. I wanted to be there for my children and for my husband, but physically and emotionally, I got to a point where I just couldn't. I couldn't show up for myself, and I absolutely couldn't show up for them either. And that was devastating for me. At some point, I had to ask myself, what was I pushing for, anyways? Why was I living like this? And ultimately, it came back to a belief issue, a belief that had been implanted in me as a young child. I had been conditioned to believe that I had to do more or be more in order to be worthy of love. Of course, now I know that this is false, but it led me to years and years of chronically trying to prove myself to the world and overachieving and perfectionism at the cost of my physical and emotional health. For me, achievement felt like identity and productivity felt like safety. I was known again as the one who could do it all and be it all. And I actually used to joke that if I was there, Rome would have been built in 12 hours. How absolutely silly is that? So even when my body was screaming, I kept pushing until I no longer could. So let's talk about what's really happening here. This is not a personality flaw. There is science and physiology to explain this hustle culture and imminent burnout. Cortisol is our primary stress hormone produced by the adrenal glands. It is produced in response to stress. This is helpful in short bursts. However, over long periods of time, this can cause serious detrimental health effects. So think being chased by a bear, cortisol is very effective. It increases your heart rate, it quickens your breath, and then it mobilizes energy to your extremities diverting blood flow away from your digestive organs, giving you, again, that ability to fight or flight. However, the body does not know the difference between being chased by a bear versus poor sleep, poor diet, blood sugar imbalances, emotional stressors, chronic overcommitment. The same response is activated. So you can see how over time the adrenal glands will burn out. Cortisol has a normal diurnal rhythm. This means that it should rise and hit its peak around 10 a.m., giving you that get up and go, and then continue to decrease as the day goes on so that you can fall asleep. So let's look at the different stages of adrenal fatigue or burnout here, and maybe you can identify which phase you are in. So in phase one, cortisol levels are actually elevated across the board because, again, your adrenal glands have been activated in this sympathetic state of chronic stress. So cortisol is elevated, so you may actually feel energized, and you may actually have that energy to push and do all the things, and you're still able to perform, or you could be wired and tired. So on paper, you look productive in phase one. Over time, though, as the adrenal glands begin to fatigue and you exhaust those reserves, because you will if you continue functioning at that level, is where we move into phase two. So this is where, if you're not addressing these stressors and you don't replete, energy can start to dip and you may need to start having a nap in the day. Brain fog sets in. You may have some hormonal imbalances. You may begin to notice digestion suffers, or you may notice injuries if you're active and exercising. You may also feel flat overall or with increased anxiety. And now moving on to phase three, if these stressors still aren't addressed and you're still trying to push through and there's just this overwhelming stress response that's still attempting to be stimulated in your body. Again, remember, your body doesn't know one stressor from the next. Then we move into phase three, and this is where life just becomes really overwhelming. Just getting out of bed in the morning is a chore and is exhausting. And even the smallest, most insignificant things, say your child spills some milk on the floor, feels like an absolute devastation, because at this point, your body actually cannot mount a stress response, right? It's burned out all of its cortisol reserves, so there's nothing left. So even the smallest thing can just feel catastrophic for you. So this isn't, you're not, you're not irrational, but your body just can't mount a stress response anymore. And then you'll have continued and worsening secondary symptoms. Again, digestion, anxiety, hormonal shifts, insomnia, so on and so forth, dizziness. That's not weakness. These are serious red flags and a sign of depletion. So now the question becomes, is this sustainable? And for me, it wasn't. I lived somewhere between phase 2 and 3 for a very long time before I had no other choice but to start identifying the stressors in my life and seeing how I could take things off my plate, how I could actually remove things from my to-do list and start moving towards supporting my body instead of pushing it to the extremes at the expense of my health. And for what? For a belief that I had in my head that wasn't true. So I stopped performing, I started regulating, I stopped proving, and I started listening. And I realized that I didn't have to earn love through exhaustion. And when I regulated myself, my environment and my home around me felt different, because regulated parents lead to regulated children. Let me say that again. Regulated parents raise regulated children. Success means nothing if your nervous system can't sustain it. The goal isn't to do more, it's to feel healthy, strong, and stable while building. If you're a parent trying to build a meaningful life for yourself or your family without the burnout, you're in the right place. If this video resonated with you, please hit subscribe, as I'll be sharing new videos every week on holistic wellness, conscious parenting, and intentional living. I'll see you next week.